Hello everyone, welcome back to Archangel RC and yet another SIYI themed video. Yeah, there is more to cover, especially after the previous video of the ZR10 Gimbal, which did cover a few things that still need to be worked out. Well, in this one, I wanted to dive a bit deeper into some of its functionality, which I find rather impressive, and also want to touch on its possibilities for use outside of the SIYI environment. This one, however, again, won't be all good, but it feels like a good way to motivate SIYI to action. But before we dive into it, I just want to remind you that using the affiliate links in the description below for your purchases from the respective online platforms does go a long way towards supporting this channel, so check them out. And now, let's dive into it. The first thing I want to focus on is, well, the focus. As unpretentious as this gimbal looks, time and time again, I have been amazed at how close it can actually focus. Some of you may have noticed in some of the flight footage how the focus has been on the VTOL motors, and a rather accurate one at that, instead of the background. I have also mentioned the focus in passing in one or two videos of late, but haven't really talked about it in detail. I am finding it simply amazing how the ZR10 can focus at the VTOL motors, blurring the background a little bit, thus giving the whole scene this almost magical feel. And it is as easy as framing the shot you need and just double tapping, or single tapping if you are using the SIYI FPV app, so it will focus on the desired subject. It is also able to focus when the sun is in the frame, and I'm actually very pleasantly surprised by its dynamic range. The ability to not black out shaded areas when something in the frame is too bright. It doesn't autocorrect for the sun peeking from behind the motor, making the motor too dark. You can still see plenty of detail, and you can see the focus is spot on, and it doesn't go hunting for it when the sun shows up. I can't really judge if all similar gimbals are like that, but this is the first time I get to play with the ZR10 long enough to actually get to messing about. Now, when we are talking about inspection or surveillance functions, you are rarely focusing on subjects this close, so in the grand scheme of things, this functionality is probably useless. But it is there, and the quality in these conditions, provided there is ample light, is there. I mean, if zoom is limited to only the optical part without getting into the digital, things are looking very good as well. For an entry-level gimbal and for what is actually the cheapest option at this feature set in the market, this is pretty nice. But let's get even more extreme with the focus. It can focus even closer than the VTOL motors. As you will see in this section of video, which was recorded after I landed the plane following the first range test, I played around with the focus and zoom, trying to focus on things that were 20 centimeters or less in front of the gimbal, and it was still able to focus. You can see how using the manual focus buttons allows me to move the focus in steps, and you can see how the focus moves along the ground, blurring quite substantially everything fore and aft of the focus point, making for some pretty whimsical shots of some otherwise quite unimpressive stomped snow and dry shrub stems. And the focus remains pretty close even after zooming, which is even more impressive. The autofocus sometimes is not able to get the job done after zooming, for instance, but I have only ever seen this issue in a situation like this, where the gimbal is stationary on the ground and I am zooming all the way into something very close by. So the autofocus hunts for a bit, but since it can't find the focus point within a reasonable margin around its current point, it gives up. So in these situations, it still needs a bit of help to get it done, but still, this is again something that won't really be an issue during use in flight, since the distances to the subject are a lot bigger, and in those situations the gimbal works pretty darn well. Hasn't missed a beat yet, but even if it does, you can have autofocus on a switch, so it is as easy as pressing a button on the Uni RC7, and those buttons are pretty convenient for such things. Now, in the Uni RC7 Advanced Functions video, I did mention of the potential of this system to easily facilitate any other connections, protocols and information transfer and gathering for testing and research equipment installed on the plane, provided it is IP enabled. And just as its use was not solely limited to being an RC radio with video functions, So the SIYI gimbal's use is not limited to the SIYI environment, since they are essentially IP cameras with PTZ control. I can't help but think that these can potentially be incorporated into ground-based, fixed security systems where you would enjoy a pretty capable video camera with some pretty nice range of motion. I can't be certain, but it should be doable, especially if it is a standard IP camera with a standardized control scheme, but made fancy for drones. In this video, however, I will have to again dive into something of a flaw with this gimbal. Despite its pretty awesome zoom and very impressive focus abilities, this gimbal still records at a measly 12 megabits per second. Yes, it records in 2.5K resolution, but still 12 megabits per second is very low. You don't really notice it that much when there is plenty of light, like was the case during the range test, or during a flight with the MK15 radio on the 29th of December 2024, a bit before I mounted the Uni RC7 system on the MFE Hero. It looks pretty decent, and if it wasn't for all the snow, I would have been able to better and more accurately follow some of the planes being flown down there. However, once it gets doomy and gloomy, you really start to notice those 12 megabits per second, the video gets grainy quickly and the detail and contrast is lost. I made an honest attempt to get into some clouds at one time. Sadly, after some point, I was not able to judge where I was in relation to the different layers as the gimbal melded all of them together in a huge grey mush. So I had to get down and get my bearings. True, these weren't the usual sort of clouds that I'd go for, the fluffy white kind, but they were what was available that day, yet sadly the gimbal let me down. It is possible things might have been a bit better with the Uni RC7 Pro system and that awesome display, since the flight in question was done on the MK15 radio, but I am having a hard time seeing things even on the gimbal's recording. So I'm not sure a change of radio would have helped in that particular situation. Generally, I don't mind the recording bitrate much, as I try to fly on good days mostly, where lighting conditions are pretty favorable and recordings have a chance to look their best. But every now and again I happen to fly in suboptimal conditions, and the lack of detail and the low bitrate really does show on these occasions. I have talked to SIYI about this particular parameter of the gimbal, mainly since most action cams now easily do 100 to 150 megabits per second, and those videos look absolutely stunning. So 12 megabits per second really does feel like a very serious compromise. They said that they will look into the possibility of increasing the recording bitrate and whether the sensor and the processor can handle the increase. My fingers are crossed that they would. I mean, not that it is much of a letdown, but again, more bitrate should improve the details in the video, perhaps also remove some of the noise when things get a bit gloomier, which would improve the gimbal's utility in all conditions, especially if used for perimeter watch, aerial surveillance and the likes. I also hope there will be at least 1 or 2 more firmware updates to this one to make it even better. Another thing that I noticed is that if I don't have the plane circling in loiter mode but rather flying around like you normally would with gentle turns and long straights, the gimbal performs a lot better in terms of horizon drift and in general looks a lot more stable. If you need to have it set in loiter mode, circling somewhere, I'd suggest a larger radius and a higher altitude. Should make a big improvement. Just don't forget to connect it to a Mavlink output from your autopilot for that Mavlink fusion that actually makes it work much better and almost entirely gets rid of the horizon drift. Since we have now exhausted the updates for this ZR10 gimbal video, I would urge you to give it a thumbs up and share if you have liked it and found it useful. Subscribe if you haven't already, and also hit that bell so you would be notified of future videos. A huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters, members, and in general anyone who has supported this channel in any way. Land safe, and I will see you in the next one.